Well, okay, everybody, we're on to week number 10. And last week we talked about video surveillance systems in terms of how they operate, the different components, a little bit about the history. And although many of you maybe thought the history lesson was a little bit long and maybe even boring, you will find when you get to your first or second job that some of these things still exist out in the field, and you'll be happy that you were somewhat familiar with them. This week we're going to talk about the application of those systems, how you use them to their full advantage, and some of the other components for field installation, and some of the things to consider when you're putting cameras up. We're not going to talk so much about why to put a camera on something, because I think that's intuitive. You know task and purpose, so that makes it easy. So last week we talked about the difference between CCTV and VSS. Closed circuit television, meaning just that, a closed backbone. Wires run from a camera back to a recording device, and you must connect to that recording device directly. It doesn't go out onto the internet anywhere. You can't watch it from anywhere in the world. You must be on that system itself to watch it. A video surveillance system, a VSS, means that you can watch it from anywhere in the world. As I've said before, I can sit right now on my iPhone and watch a lobby in China, which as of right this minute is the middle of the night, or at least late in the evening. No one should be there. But I can take a look at it because it's on the network. And on the network goes out from the LAN, the local area network, to the WAN, the wide area network, and onto the internet where we can view it from anywhere in the world. We looked at the evolution of cameras and recording devices, and we still use the term, and many of you used it in your discussions, pull the tape. Let's look at the tape. And I think it's something we're always going to say, because it's been that way. We still call TV shows TV programs, right? Even though they're TV shows now, and we talk about changing the channel. It's not really a channel. That was the old days of turn dialers and tuners on TVs. You change the channel. Now it's all coming across one channel because it's all digital, but we still use those terms. So we're still going to say that, but we know the difference between recording devices are now all digital imaging, no more tapes per se, but it's okay to say that. We talked about the basic schematic layout of systems over time, how that changed, how you used to have one camera per recording device with the old VCRs, then the NetVRs and DVRs over time. We talked about task and purpose. And again, task and purpose, highly important. The task is what the camera should be doing. The purpose is why it's doing that. So if I say I have a camera that points at the jewelry counter in my store to prevent people from stealing or switching jewelry, which is one way to steal it, right? Switch costume for real. Any type of transportation of goods, right? Movement of that bracelet off the counter into my pocket. The task is to monitor the jewelry counter. The purpose is to deter and detect theft. Decision points for PTZ versus fixed. We all know that PTZ cameras are really cool and they can move around and you can zoom in and you can follow people. But if your task and purpose says that the task is to look at the main entry door and the purpose is to view all persons who may be trying to come into the building without permission, then a PTZ, a pan tilt zoom, is not your best choice. Because if your task is to view that door, that PTZ could be swung around to view something else at the time and you are not meeting your task. And therefore your purpose has been changed. So think about the decision points for fixed versus PTZ, not simply because PTZs are more versatile, which they kind of are, but they may negate your task and purpose right away when someone spins that camera around. We know about the impact of lighting and weather and other factors, and we'll talk a little more about that. So we're ready to start putting our cameras and devices into use, but we need to know some of the nuances of installation and selection of peripherals like mounts and power supplies and things like that. So let's get into it and talk a little bit about picking the right camera. So we know task and purpose, right? We just talked about it. That's the main driver for picking your camera, fixed versus PTZ generally. But we also have to talk about environment. Think about if you bought an indoor camera and hung it on the side of a building in a rainforest. I think you probably get about 10 minutes out of that camera before it shorts out and sparks, and then it goes dead and you never use it again. So your environment is very important. The camera housings themselves may need to be heated. You know, if you have a PTZ in Pittsburgh, I would generally say that you would, on the outside of a building, have a built-in heater so that the components don't freeze. If just even a little bit of moisture gets in there, they're very small components. You want to make sure they stay dry and they stay movable. You have to worry about your power source. Where's the power going to come from? You saw some of the cameras that were on campus that were in the last assignment, and they are mounted on the brick side of the building. Well, guess what? There's not an outlet built in at that spot. You had to drill through the brick to get there. That's the type of power source that you have to consider. Is there power available? And then there's also solar. There's also battery, and they come with good and bad things about them, right? There are solar cameras that you might see out on highways across America. A lot of them in the Southwest, not so many of them in Pennsylvania, although there are some, because solar has to have some level of sun. And as solar gets better, it's definitely going to be an option. I actually use solar for my own home cameras, and I'm in Michigan. It's pretty dark, but if you use a large enough solar panel and you put it in the right place, you're still covered. And then you just basically charge the battery, and if the solar does start to, it can't keep up because of hours of darkness and poor weather and those kinds of things, you can always pop the battery out, charge it, and put it back in. So it's a dual power. Excuse me. The transmission source. Is it going to be a wired camera or a wireless camera? We're all pretty familiar now with wireless cameras. Over the last several years, they've become the home option. They're not so much used in industry, and we'll discuss a little bit about why. The practicality of the location. I would be able to get an excellent view from on top of the Empire State Building. But for my task and purpose, probably not, because if I want to see anything on the street, they're going to look like little specks moving around. And it's basically an impractical location anyway. You really can't have somebody hang off the side of the top of the Empire State Building to work on cameras when they need to be worked on. It's just not a practical location. And then mounting hardware. We're going to go into pretty good depth on mounting hardware because it makes a difference, and you're going to need to select the mounting hardware for your cameras in your warehouse project. So right back again to beat the heck out of task and purpose, but it's really important, and now you're going to see why it comes into play. Because when you talk about the task and purpose of your camera, you need to understand what your field of view should be. So let's work backwards. Let's look at the purpose of that jewelry counter camera. Right? I'm going to put a camera above on the ceiling looking down at my jewelry counter in my store. And I want to understand what the field of view is. Now I could put a fisheye lens in that we talked about last week, and I could see probably the whole store. But if my purpose is to detect theft or movement of materials at the jewelry counter, I don't need to see the whole store. More is not better in that case. So my field of view is the jewelry counter itself. So picking out my camera, would I need a fisheye lens for that? If I was up decent height, jewelry counter, let's say, is 20 feet long, maybe 4 feet wide, right? That's a big jewelry counter. Probably let's go 15 and 3. And I'm up on the ceiling. I could probably take in the whole thing with a standard lens. Wouldn't have to worry about the fisheye. Wouldn't have to worry about picking up stuff on the side that I really don't care about with this camera. If there's something else I need to watch in the room, maybe I need a second camera. But field of view is an important factor. Distance is also another important factor. Think about your outside cameras. I want to see the parking lot at the Giant Eagle in Slippery Rock. That's a pretty good sized parking lot. But I probably could put a camera on the roof of the Giant Eagle and see across the parking lot fairly well. Probably a PTZ, at least a zoom of some kind, either digital or a lens zoom, right? An actual mechanical zoom on the lens. And I could see that. Now let's go to a huge parking lot at a sporting venue. The Palace at Auburn Hills, where the Detroit Pistons play, has a huge parking lot. Not all arenas anymore have parking lots. A lot of them have garages or they're in cities. That one happens to be in a suburban area, a very open suburban area, actually, right on the fringe of it. And they have huge parking lots. If you put a camera on top of the Palace at Auburn Hills and tried to see the cheap seat parking way on the other side where guys like me park, you wouldn't see anything but maybe specks moving, and those specks would be the cars. So the field of view and the distance are two things you have to worry about. I want the field of view. I want to see the whole parking lot, but the distance is too far. So now I need a different type of camera, or I need more cameras in a different array. I have to think about the barriers to the view. What's going to be in my way? So I may be up on top of that arena looking out, but there could be in the middle and there isn't one, but there could be a bus parking area right in the middle. And is that bus parking area going to, block the view for 100 yards behind it because of the height of the buses and the heights of the cameras? So barriers to view are something you need to think about on your task and purpose. Will I be able to meet my task and meet my purpose if the camera goes in this certain location in this certain type of camera? You have to worry about lighting. And we'll talk a little bit about lighting and where to mount a camera in relationship to artificial lighting, meaning, pole lights, things like that, but also follow the sun. So again, let's go right back to that same arena. Now I have a camera up on top and I've got the right camera and there's nothing blocking my view. And most games start at 8:30 p.m. So most people start rolling in around 6:30 because they want to get to their seats. A lot of people come in early and they park their cars and they want to see. And it is wintertime because that's when basketball is played. And the sun goes down in Michigan about 6:30. So when the sun's going down in the west, any cameras I have pointed to the west are going to be an issue. The time, I know what time I really want to use that. That's right before game times. Most game time starts are 8:30. People start showing up at 6:30, and I know that the western sun, for a good portion of my basketball season, is going to be right in my eyes. When you're doing lighting, you have to consider, especially with outdoor cameras, but some indoor ones as well with windows. I've seen people put window cameras in rooms. They're pointed toward the windows, and the windows are pointed right toward either the east or the west. You have to think about the direction there because it's going to impact your view. One thing you need to think about with cameras is what you need to see. So when we come to the task and purpose, back to our jewelry counter, let's flip back and forth. And we'll go back to the arena as well. At the arena, or at the jewelry counter rather, I'm going to want to see who did what. Specifically, who? The person. That is identification level. I want to be able to identify the person on that video who put that bracelet in their pocket. They asked to see some things. The clerk put some jewelry up on the counter for them to look at. They're trying things on. They're looking at it. The phone rings because their partner called the jewelry department from the outside on their cell phone. The clerk turns their head for a minute, and the person grabs one of those bracelets that was off on the side and puts it in their pocket. Right? I want to be able to see that person and understand who it was for prosecution purposes. Now, if we go to the arena and the parking going on way far out, that's pretty far away. I'm going to want classification level. I'm going to want to know generally what's going on and generally whether this is a human or whether it's an animal. I think it's the best way to describe it. If I look across the parking lot and I see that there's a fight breaking out in the far corner of the parking lot, I'm not going to be able to really identify who's who. That's too far of a distance. And I don't really need to know that right now. For this purpose, I just need to know that I need someone to respond to a fight in the far corner of the parking lot. That is classification level. I can see generally what's going on. I can see generally that there are humans involved. Or, is it two animals, two raccoons fighting over a scrap of, somebody's hot dog out in the corner, right? I'll be able to tell. Classification level means I can classify it as human and generally that this is a disturbance. Identification means I can tell that something is going on specifically, what it is, and who by name, or at least by description, full description, I can get a good picture. Now, ironically, when you see those grainy bank photos in the morning when you get up and watch the news, if some of you watch the news or see it online, someone robbed the bank in Pittsburgh last night, and here's a picture of the guy, and what you got is this blob kind of picture. Of course, they always have the hood pulled up and the mask pulled up over their nose, but that's about the best you can see. That to me is classification level. I can tell that that is a person. Generally, I can tell whether it's a male or a female based on body physique. Generally, I can tell, there's all kinds of things you can tell from those, but you really are guessing. If they had identification level on those cameras, you'd be able to zero in pretty close because some of those pictures are fairly close to people and be able to tell eye color. You'd be able to see definitely male, female, maybe a wisp of hair or something sticking out from around the hood, which is really what most places should use for interior cameras. So classification level, I can generally tell whether it's man or beast. I can have a general idea of what's going on for response purposes to know that there's a disturbance and an anomaly. Identification level, I can definitely say who and what they did. So when we talk about the environment for our cameras, the first order of business is inside or outside. I actually installed a camera not too long ago had one installed. I didn't do it myself, but I had one installed in Toronto, and we were going to put it on the outside of the building. And I decided actually we didn't want to drill through the brick. It was a leased building, didn't know how long we were going to be there. So we mounted it inside, looking out the window from the front at the same thing it would have been looking at the outside of the building. It's just on the protected side of the inside, and I was able to use a cheaper camera. But inside or outside, if you don't use the right housing and the right camera, you use an internal camera on the outside, you're going to be really disappointed because they get damaged pretty quickly. They are electronic. You have to worry about the height, and height is a factor of distance. So using the wrong camera or wrong camera mount at a height will give you grief, and we'll see a little bit of that on the mounts. That's where it really has an impact on your costs. Lighting, environment, again, look for the sun, but also look for ambient lighting. If you are in a city, you put up your cameras to watch something, and then somebody in the next door across the street turns on their neon open for business sign, it is going to give you a heck of a halo on your camera where you can't see something. Is there a better angle? Right? You have to worry about ambient lighting from others around you, and you have to worry about whether your camera is pointed toward or away from lighting sources. You want to be able to take the impact of the lighting source, but you don't want it aimed directly at a lighting source because that will give you this big halo effect on your camera, and I think you know what I'm talking about. So do you need infrared? Perhaps you use a camera with very low light so it doesn't pick up that ambient lighting, but you use infrared to pick up things that are moving. Simple domed or open lens. That may be a factor of environment, like weather. It could also be a factor of whether you want to use it for deterrent or not. If you have a fixed camera and you want it shining right on that jewelry counter, and you want people to know that's what we're watching, then you use an open lens. If you want to be a little bit of a mystery, we could be watching you. Maybe we're watching something else, but there's definitely a camera here and you don't know exactly what we're watching, so don't take a chance. Domed is the way to go. But domed cameras also keep out dust, debris. They keep people from doing anything to the lens of your camera, right? You could obscure the dome, but I have done a number of exercises where I walk into a place that has a open lens camera, a box camera, and I just grab a rag and I throw it over the lens, and then I go about and do my stuff and see if anybody notices that camera is now covered. With a dome, it's a little bit harder to do that. I mean, you can spray paint a dome. You've all seen it in the movies, but it's a little harder than just draping something over the lens. And then climate. So climate different than weather for inside and outside, but this is something tried and true, and our friend Ben Franklin told us all about it. Because cameras hate lightning storms. They will blow out the camera itself. They will blow out power supplies. Lightning can blow out converters. If you have, we talked about a little bit about analog cameras and digital cameras. Analog cameras can be converted. We talked about that a little last week. Just put a converter on it, you can convert them to digital. But a power surge caused by a lightning strike will absolutely blow those out. I have 20 cameras and I have to get repairs done on this week because of a power surge from a lightning storm that blew out each one of those converters. It just overloaded them. They have a fuse, the fuse failed, and the converters were still blown out. So lightning is the enemy of a camera system, and there's one reason why especially. It goes back to height. We mount cameras on the highest point possible in most places so that we can see more. Now, as you know, with your task and purpose, that may not be the best option. More is not always better. If I put a camera on top of this particular communications tower to look all across I could see what this person is seeing. I think it looks like out of an airplane window from the corners of the picture there. Excuse me, but I could see all around, but all I would see would be, beautiful mountain views maybe, but I certainly wouldn't see anything of value. But people tend to do that, and the higher up you are, the more likely you are to have a lightning strike, right? Lightning strikes the highest point, and that is normally where people try to put their cameras. So you have to worry about the environment, and you have to worry about lightning strikes and things like that when you do outside cameras. So we go from lightning to lighting and power sources. So they are all considerations when you mount your camera. When you are mounting cameras outside, and especially when you're mounting them on light poles, right? Because in parking lots, normally cameras are in parking lots for people's safety. Makes perfect sense. You want to mount your exterior cameras below the lighting source. Below the lighting source will reduce the number of halos you get, right? You're normally not looking at, if you're below the lighting source on one lamppost, you normally are low enough to negate some of the halos from the others around it. And it also prevents washout. When you mount cameras above the lighting source, the things you see below it tend to look more washed out. I don't know what the reason is for that. I am sure that there is some sort of a scientific reason why that happens. But let's just say it happens. If you mount a camera above the lighting source, what you see below will be more washed out than if you mount it below. So, general rule, mount your cameras below your lighting source. We hardwire cameras. We never plug them in. So when we go into a power source, we just don't plug them into a wall like a wall socket or into an Ethernet port, right? Because they can do power over Ethernet. We just don't plug them in. We hardwire them in. Why do we do that? Well, I have seen a number of cameras that someone wanted to mount a camera on a wall inside somewhere, and they had an electrician put a electric outlet next to it so they could use a regular cord and plug the camera in. Makes perfect sense. Pretty easy, right? Pretty cheap to put an electric outlet up in an industrial setting. You normally have an electrician around. Those things are pretty cheap. Go ahead and put a plug there for me. But any camera that's just plugged in can be unplugged by anybody. And if that's what's powering your camera, then no matter what type of recorder you're using, if you're using an SD card and you're recording on board even, you're not going to record anything because that camera is dead once the power is cut. So there were some cameras in the recent postings that showed exposed wire to the camera. And in some cases, that was a combined wire. It was powered through the same wire as the communications. Once you cut it, everything is dead. So we don't plug them in. We use hardwired and we protect the wiring. Now, power over Ethernet is pretty basic stuff, and I think most of you are familiar with it. Instead of plugging something into the wall, you plug it into the internet, so it's getting its communications through a communications wire, but the power is also coming through that same wire. It's almost like when you have a Roku device and you plug it into the back of Roku or a Amazon Fire Stick and you plug it directly into the back of your TV, and you don't use the adapter, you use that USB to plug it into the TV. So it's running off the power of the TV. It's basically transforming that power into low voltage so it can run that device and you don't have to plug it in the wall. Power over Ethernet, same thing. You're using the communications cable, the thing you're going to use to get it back to the internet, to run low voltage power and signal data go over that single connection, and it's low voltage. That's probably the best way to do it. Now, if you have cameras that are powered over Ethernet, right, they're purchased specifically that way, but you find you move that camera and, oops, I'm going to use this in some other way, you can use a power over Ethernet injector, which is simply an adapter that you can go back and plug into that camera and now plug it into the wall instead of running the power over the Ethernet. You just may want to do that, or you may have an Ethernet connection that just can't provide that power. It's called a PoE injector. That's just a gee-whiz thing. But understand that if you're running cameras that are power over Ethernet and somebody says, well, the power is not sufficient, we're not using that type of internet jack. You can plug in, you can do signal, but you can't use that camera and you want to reuse it, use a PoE injector. It's just an adapter, so you can plug it in. So lighting, below the light source. We never just plug cameras into the wall like we're plugging in our toaster, because someone will unplug it and you will get nothing. And then we decide how our power is going to come in. Either it's going to be standard electric power through a protected wire that comes in through the back that you can't see, or it has some sort of wire armor on it. They make wire armor. It's like metal casing, right? Or conduit, hard conduit, piping, right? That wires go through that you can't get to them and cut them. But we never just plug them in. We always use hardwired and protected. We can use power over Ethernet. If you look at the ARC, there are power over Ethernet cameras up there. By the way, based on pictures that people have provided, the Power over Ethernet is not protected. The wire goes off the camera. There's a little network jack almost right next to it within a foot, and they plug it in, they coil that wire up. If you unplug that Ethernet cable, just unclip it, pull it out of that little white jack, the power goes out, so does the signal. The thing is dead, and you're not going to see what goes on. There's nothing. It can't even record. If you had an SD card for a little backup memory on the camera, even that's gone. And then again, if you want to reuse a camera that has power over Ethernet capabilities, but you don't have an Ethernet connection that has enough power, you can use an adapter. Next thing to consider is your transmission source. So we have talked about wired cameras, how they wire from the camera back to the recording device through a power source connection from the side. And wired cameras are very normally used, and they normally go to a network connection, making them a VSS. But you can do that with coax, regular coax cable, like, old television cable. You can do it with a twisted pair of wires. You actually have a little adapter, and you can run any camera over a twisted pair. It's old school. The video's not all that good. It's really the original method for analog cameras, just a twisted pair of wires. But it still works, but wired cameras. And then we have wireless. Your Ring doorbell, your Blink camera, your Google Nest camera, all of those types of devices are wireless cameras. And it's pretty easy. That's why we use them for home use. But you have to think about bandwidth. Now, your Ring camera or your Nest camera or your Blink camera on your house is on the same network that you're using to view it. It's a single network connection. You're not going out really, you're going out to the internet, but it's really a local area network thing. When you start to send stuff out across the internet to someplace 50, 60, 70 miles away that's not on the same wireless network as your cameras, you are using bandwidth, and you are using upload bandwidth, right? The speed counts. So you will, if you talk to your parents, or if you have your own internet connection, if you pay your own bills, whatever, you may have an internet connection that is anywhere from, I think the minimum you can probably get is about 25 megabytes per second. And then they have some super fast business ones that are over 1,000 megabytes per second. And that is the download speed, how fast you can view things, how fast you reload things, how fast your video game will go without glitching and starting to spin the little beach ball, right? But when you're using cameras, you have to worry about upload speed. You're uploading things. You're uploading that video to the network. Upload speeds are generally much slower. If you have a 25 megabyte download speed, you probably have about a 3 or 4 megabyte upload speed. Uploading things to the internet takes a lot longer than downloading things. You can start watching a video on Netflix almost immediately, but when you want to upload a video, notice it takes longer. You have to worry about wireless cameras with upload speed. I have my house here in Michigan, and I have pretty fast internet simply because we use a lot of it, right? I have a pretty connected house. And my upload speeds still, when I upload this video, it will take a little while. I have a house in Pennsylvania that I use for when I come into town to teach, solely for that purpose because it's cheaper than the hotels I was staying in. And the upload speed there is even less because I didn't need a lot of bandwidth because I'm the only one really there. My wife comes out once in a while, but I'm the only one there. If I need to upload videos, it'll be for school, and I'll just go do that on campus. But there's a definite difference, and the wireless cameras that I use on that house, I had to opt for a faster internet speed simply because of the download. The upload was fine. I was okay with that. I could watch videos on TV and that stuff. The download speed wasn't enough, and I had to upgrade the video. So bandwidth is a thing with wireless cameras, a real thing. And when you're running an industrial setting with 300-400 camera system, and you're going to stream all of those, uploading them to a network and watching them someplace else, the bandwidth strain is tremendous. Your IT department will be knocking on your door the next day saying, we can't get our financial statements uploaded. We can't get our production systems to upload information as to the quality of our product because you're hogging the bandwidth. It's still a thing. Bandwidth has come a long way since the days of dial-up, but it's still a thing. Wireless cameras, you're going to use a lot of it. You also have to consider about, you want to use wireless where you really can't get wiring, obviously, makes sense. But how far out is the network going to go? So if you don't have, say, power out on a pole, just a regular pole that you're going to mount a camera on in the corner of a far parking lot because you need to see that area. And there's no power out there. The nearest light pole is way up. You're not going to use that one. You're just going to use this pole. Right? You're going to sink a pole and you're going to put a camera on it. And there's no wires out there. Well, then you just use a wireless camera. Much cheaper, right, than running wire and having to tunnel underneath the parking lot to get to the pole, right? Or run an overhead line that looks like heck. But will the network reach that far? Does the network slow considerably when you get out that far? That's a real consideration with wireless cameras, especially on the outside. And then when you go out that far, you have to understand that you're opening up your network, your wireless network, out that far. I don't know whether you have this phenomenon or not, but I see cars that will cruise my neighborhood once in a while, and I kind of know who these people are. They're normally people in real estate or sales, and they will slow down in front of every house because they're looking for an internet connection to hook to because they want to download the pictures of the house that they just took and get it posted. They're a little ways from their office, or they're going to another appointment, and they need to get this thing in. So they're looking up for a network with a decent upload speed that isn't protected. Well, you're going to protect your network, but you're still opening it up because networks can be hacked, and you're opening it up that far. So wired networks, much harder to hack. Wireless ones, easier from a perspective of being on the ground and being able to pick up the signal. Consider how long the wire runs are and whether it's worth it and whether your network will be strong enough and have the right speeds. Wired will be your normal default, even though wireless seems cheaper, seems more modern. Everybody's doing it. Why can't we do it just like we do at home with the Ring? The reason is the bandwidth. Finally, you look at practicality of location. So if I want to watch the front of my building in an urban environment, the best place for me to watch the entry may very well be from across the street at another building. Let's just say I own two buildings on a city street, one across from each other. I have a little complex, right? It's a retail complex. I own 2 or 3 storefronts on the west side of Main Street and on the east side of Main Street. The best way for me to watch some of the stuff on the west side may be on the east side. I can potentially take in 3 storefronts with one camera with the right lens. It's close enough because Main Street, just in small town USA, is not that wide. But what about traffic? In this case, it's vehicular traffic. In other places, it may be people. If you have such traffic that's going to walk in front of your lens all the time, it will be very difficult to detect anomalies and be very difficult to get a clear picture. There will always be something in the way when you want to see something. So when you talk about the practicality of location, this is where height comes into play normally, and distance and placement, general placement, because you have to worry about the traffic, be it people, be it be it truck traffic, right? If you're trying to do that shot from Main Street, and you go up just over the door of one on the east side so you can look at the west side, and cars are getting in the way, and there's a lot of people traffic that's walking by and it's getting in the way. If you go up another 10 feet, that's great until tractor trailers go through. And what if that happens to be, Main Street happens to be a truck route, right? A lot of main streets happen to be, because Main Street USA sometimes is just an offshoot of some highway. So worry about the traffic and understand what could get in your way. You need to watch the area a little bit. You need to understand what time of day things go through that might block your view. Think about damage and vandalism. People put up cameras for that very reason. So if I want to have a camera and I want to see who's knocking the windows out or, damaging things on the street, and I want to see who they are, I'm going to put a camera about 6 to 7 feet off the ground because I can see their face. But the person with the baseball bat who's knocking out the windows can pretty easily reach 6 or 7 feet with that baseball bat, and now I also lost my camera. Now, if I've got it recorded in the right place, I know who that person is, and this is really good stuff. And it's worth the cost of a camera, perhaps, to put that person in jail, but you have to worry about vandalism and damage. Generally speaking, cameras below 17 feet have some risk of vandalism and damage. Doesn't mean you should never put a camera below 17 feet. That's not the purpose at all, but certainly not in an area where the task is to watch an area and the purpose is to watch an area for vandalism. if you are watching for vandalism, the general rule of thumb, and this comes from the U.S. Army manual and it's stuck with the security industry forever, is 17 feet. You are generally protected from damage or vandalism. How about the wiring run, the practical location? I could get a great view from on top of that silo, but I have to run wiring up the side of a silo. Now, I bring up the silo because I did that once. I had a research farm, an animal health facility where they were doing research for farm products, right? For animal medicines. And so we had pigs and cows and all kinds of good stuff. And there were 2 grain silos. It was an actual working farm because when you've got farm animals, you have to feed them, right? You need the silage, you need all kinds of stuff, right? Tractor barns, the whole works, right? When you drove out there, it was a really nice, large farm. So I decided that I wanted to watch the perimeter, and the best place was the highest place because I was really looking for classification level and anomalies along the fence line. Wasn't looking for identification. I just needed to get a picture to see when it looked like somebody was going over a fence. And I would set motion sensors on those cameras and be able to do that, use some video analytics to determine the classification because it was a good distance. So I put the cameras up on top of the silo, and there was power to the silo and because there was a lift. And so I was able to tap off that power, and I used wireless cameras with an antenna so that I wouldn't have to run my communications cables up there. Great idea. 2 things wrong with that, okay? The first one is that silage, I don't know how many farmers we have in the class, but I will tell you that silage breaks down. When it breaks down, it ferments essentially, and it creates heat. And I had those cameras up there, and the camera guy drove away, and within 10, 12 hours, I was getting calls from the security officer saying there's something wrong with the new cameras. They're really foggy. Well, the heat was causing condensation on top of the domes that were protecting these cameras, and there was nothing I could do about that because this was in Michigan, and it was cool outside, and the warmth from the silage was getting up there, creating steam, and all I saw was this fog. Okay, so I didn't really check the environment very well. And I didn't pick a practical location because then the number 2 thing happened. It started to warm up because it was springtime. I said, oh, well, at least I got the summer to worry about this fog issue, right? Figure out how I started to think about, can I put some sort of a protector on the bottom, some kind of shield to keep the heat from going up, blowers to blow the heat away and the fog away from the cameras. I mean, it was like a mousetrap game. I was putting all kinds of devices in my head on this thing and writing it out. But then what happened? Our friend Ben Franklin happened, and both of those cameras got zapped in a spring lightning storm and were pretty much useless. We took them down, and they were interesting pieces of abstract art at that point because they were kind of melty looking and misshapen, and there was no way they'd ever be used again. So think about how far the wiring run was. That's what really made me think about that, and then I thought about my view and accomplishing my task and purpose, but I didn't think about the practicality. The other thing about practicality is, let's talk about, will you get the same task and purpose from an easier location? So back to our jewelry counter. I was going above our jewelry counter, right, with a camera looking down where people could see it, right, hanging from the ceiling. Everybody knew they were on camera and you could see everything. But maybe I want to be able to see faces better rather than tops of heads. Can I get the same task and purpose if I put that camera on the wall behind the cashier? And if I do, will the cashier's head get in the way? That traffic issue. So the practicality of the location and the selection of location, you have to consider all of the activity and all of the factors when you're doing that. Deterrence being one of them, right? If I want people to be deterred by a camera, that camera must be pretty visible. It must be advertised in some way. Right? A hidden camera can be a great tool because you can pick up on a lot of stuff. But if the whole idea is to prevent that stuff from happening in the first place, why not have the camera be visible? And I will tell you when we talk in investigations class and other classes about hidden cameras, there's a lot of legal implications there anyway. The cameras that you see in Walmart and Target hang from the ceiling for a reason, because you look up and you know you're on camera. They could very easily put pinpoint cameras into those ceiling tiles up above. They could put cameras in the wall where you'd never see them, and people would never understand how they kept getting caught. But bottom line is that a conscious decision was made, and a smart one, to say, if we make these cameras visible, then people will see them, and that will make them think twice, and maybe we'll just have less theft. It's not about, gosh, we caught 100 people shoplifting. It's we prevented shoplifting. And then you have to worry about aesthetics. Cameras. There was a comment in the assignment last week, and I made the comment also that I'd done a design not too long ago, and it happened to be in a cafeteria in a building, and the cafeteria had a point of sale system where it needed to have cameras above each self-service register. They wanted them above each register that they had a person in, so that they could see to make sure there were no sweetheart deals, right? So that when you came up with a full lunch, I just didn't charge you for one candy bar. They needed to match the register activity with what they could see on camera, which was what was on the tray. That type of thing happens a lot in retail, more than we care to understand. And then in the seating area, they wanted cameras in the seating area. I can't even remember what the reason was at the time. They said they had some reasons. I think it was to see the how full it was, so they could kind of meter lunchtime. They were going to assign lunchtime specials during certain hours, so that people wanted to save money. They went during those certain hours because people could pick their lunchtime. It's a salaried environment, thus, not have to have seating area for all 500 people. They could seat 100 at a time based on when people went to work or to lunch. They wanted cameras to view the available seating. By the time we got done, the ceiling looked like it had black domes all over it. It looked like a chocolate chip cookie. I mean, a good chocolate chip cookie with all those chunks of chocolate in it, right? I mean, there were just spots all over. The aesthetics were absolutely horrendous. It really looked like, that we were watching to see, how many bites of your sandwich you took. And we had to go back and say, this is not practical, nor is it a great look. There's got to be another way to do that, and we could do that actually we could do it with heat sensors that just look like little dots on the ceiling. They're not cameras at all, to pick up how many people were in the cafeteria at a certain time. So that eliminated that whole idea of the seating area. And then with the cash registers, we found that you could mount a camera just like an ATM one on the cash register itself. You didn't have to go above. So aesthetics are important when it comes to practicality of location as well. You want to understand how good it's going to look. You don't want to make a retail or an office environment that looks like you're in prison. So just about the remainder of the time here, I'd like to talk about camera mounts. And this may seem like an easy thing, right? The camera itself is the important thing. How you mount it is just a practical matter of where you put it. But it really isn't. The mounts are really important. They can enhance or obstruct your view. They can definitely impact your cost of ownership. And by cost of ownership, from that term, I want you to think in terms of a car. You buy a car for $20,000. Used car, $20,000. Nice used car. Your cost of ownership is not $20,000. If you drive 1,000 miles a month, 12,000 miles a year, you use gasoline in that car. Let's say it's not an electric or a hybrid, and it's pure gasoline engine. You may burn $1,000 worth of gasoline. That's part of your cost of ownership. Had you spent that $20,000 on a different car, perhaps a hybrid, then you may spend only $500. You've reduced your cost of ownership, but hybrid cars and electric cars cost more than gas. There's a formula you can actually use. I just bought a new car, and I don't drive many miles at all, and I made the determination I got a gas engine, not a hybrid. I actually like hybrids, so I like the way they drive. I've never used a full all-electric car before, and I imagine that they would be nice to drive too, very quiet, very responsive. But I actually like hybrids. I think they just drive nice. I like them in the city when it's really quiet and it's almost like a golf cart. But the number of miles I use versus the price of gas at the time, and unfortunately that's something that's wavers. But the cost of ownership was cheaper with the gas engine for me. Cost of ownership when it comes to camera systems is the same way. If I put a camera in a certain place on a certain type of mount, if that camera needs repair, it may cost me thousands of dollars every time to repair that camera. And you'll see some examples of that in a minute. Whereas if I use the right mount and put it in the right place, that cost could go down to hundreds for repairs. It is exponentially higher if you use the wrong mount in the wrong location for your cost of ownership. And then again, aesthetics matter. Camera mounts add significantly or detract significantly from your aesthetics. And as we look at the camera mounts, you'll see some of them just look better than others in a professional environment. So the one used indoors the most, and in the pictures that you provided in last week's assignment, a lot of you had cameras that were mounted on the ceiling. And when they were mounted on the ceiling, almost in every case, there were a few exceptions, and there always will be, but in almost every case, the ceiling was what's known as a drop ceiling. A drop ceiling are those acoustic ceiling tiles that sit in a metal grid. If you've ever redone a basement in a house, you most likely used a drop ceiling. Older houses, when they redid the basement for family rooms and things in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you always put it in the metal grid and dropped those acoustic ceiling tiles and then added a few fluorescent lights every so often to really make it look like, well, a little bright for my taste. But this is the type of mount that you have for a drop ceiling. That gray part in the middle is that acoustic ceiling tile. And essentially, it just, the camera goes up. There's a bar that mounts in the center. It screws in. There's a screw in on the back of the camera for it, or a little bracket you put on to screw it in. And then you have the little arms that go out to support it. Now, the wiring goes through that center tube and out, so there's no exposed wiring at all. You're above the ceiling. However, if you pop up the ceiling tile next to this one, you normally can reach over and disconnect the wiring from the camera. I would not use a camera in a ceiling mount in a drop ceiling in a high security area, because again, you can actually access the back of the camera if you just want to pop the ceiling tile next to it and, on a ladder and reach up and grab it. But they're very cost effective, very cheap to use, very easy to move the camera. If you decide the camera needs to be moved 10 feet in another direction because you changed your operation, you moved the jewelry counter from one part of the store to another, you just take this down and you put in another ceiling tile. A ceiling tile runs about $7 or $8 when you buy them in bulk. You put in a fresh ceiling tile. It's all nice and looks neat. The hole isn't there anymore. And you just move this camera and maybe even the ceiling tile with the hole in it and the bracket to a new place. Very easy stuff. That's how they work. The vulnerability is that you can pop the ceiling tile next to it and reach over and grab the wiring. So the next most popular, if you will, internal mount for a camera, especially for PTZ or something with a 360 lens in it, right? A camera with maybe 4 different lenses in it, 4 of them looking different directions, stitched together for a 360 view, is the pendant mount. And the pendant mount just is that. It's a pendant that comes down from the ceiling. Now, if you look at this particular picture in this ceiling, and I chose this particularly because if we mounted directly to the ceiling, when we started to swing around, what would we be looking at? We'd be looking at the fluorescent lights directly. We'd be looking at some of the, there's a little recess it looks like there. If you look off to the side in here, on the right-hand side there, you see another camera that's on the drop ceiling. So that's probably the mount we looked at last, right? That ceiling mount. But this one drops down. It's below that light source, and you're able to see all around whatever's going on in this particular room below us. One of the other beauties of a pendant mount is you get closer, right? So this camera has a certain view if it's looking down. This one is, in this case, about 2 feet, and these can drop down about 4. You'll even see some 6-foot pendants, but after that, it's kind of, you find a different way to do it. But you get closer, and if you get closer, you get a better view. The other thing is it's easier to work on. If this distance is, say, 15 feet here, with this one, if you're up 17, 18 feet, you're not going to be able to work on a ladder that high, right? It's a safe ladder. You'd have to use a step ladder, and they just don't make them that size for a reason, right? They get less safe the higher you go. In this case, you could probably get a step ladder that comes to about here, and you could work on the camera on a ladder. So there's ease of operation, right? Generally, you get a better view, and they're a little closer. So this fits all the bill of cost of ownership compared to this one, perhaps. Although, I don't know the height of the ceiling, but I think you get the picture. The lower it is, the easier it is to work on. So cost of ownership is down. You get a better view, and you get the full 360 without obstruction of all of your noise here, if you will, on the ceiling. Now, if we go outside, and generally these are used outside, although there are applications for goosenecks inside as well, on a wall, right? So you get a little bit of standoff. But generally speaking, the gooseneck mount like this goes on a pole. The power comes from the pole itself, either directly from the the source or through a transformer up through that box, which is strapped onto the pole. Generally speaking, you wouldn't drill through the pole. You'd strap around it because it's easy. You don't damage the pole. You don't ruin the integrity of it so water can get down in there. You just strap to it, and you have a very small opening in the pole to punch out to bring your wiring through, rather than have to drill 3 times, right, for the wiring and then screws and other things. And then the wiring goes up through the neck down to the camera, and the signals go back up, and everybody's happy. Now for the gooseneck, the advantage is this. I want you to take your hand and I want you to place it, the palm of your hand facing you on your nose. And actually do this, okay? Now, I'm doing it, so you can do it too. You don't look silly. Look to your left, look to your right, and pick out the 2 things that you can see right even with your hand. In this particular room, I can see a clock on the right, and in the next room, I can see a lamp on the left. Now slowly move your hand out about 6 inches. Pick 2 new spots. In this particular spot, I have now a lamp on my right, and I have a bookcase on my left. Now go out about 15 inches, maybe a little more than a foot, right? Your elbow should be at about a 45-degree angle. If your elbow's down straight, go about a 45-degree angle out. And now I can see just about everything except for one table in the room, because my hand is in the way of that. And a mirror on the wall is partially blocked, but I can see a whole lot of stuff. You get the picture. The farther out you move from something that's an obstruction, the less it becomes an obstruction. Easy stuff, right? So the gooseneck allows you to go out from, now imagine if we took this camera and mounted it directly. We took the gooseneck part off, this little metal standoff off, and we mounted the camera directly here, pointed down, right? We mounted it underneath this little box on the pole. When we swung around, this pole would take up, of the 360 degrees, this pole would take up a good 90% of our view. Out here, it takes up probably about 15% because of the standoff. So the gooseneck gives you a standoff. It allows you then to adjust the height to wherever you want it. And again, if our magic number is 17 feet, then because we can access it and it's not, it's not able to be vandalized very easily from that height. Anybody can vandalize anything from any height with a high-powered rifle, right? But nobody's going to really reach up 17 feet with a baseball bat and hit it, right? The common tool for knocking cameras down. And so you're able to to put this in a place where it decreases your cost of ownership, increases your likelihood of or decreases your likelihood of a vandalism incident or another environmental incident. It's not on top of the pole. Power certainly can be transferred, but the pole will be grounded and will most likely protect your camera. So a gooseneck is really to get the pole out of the way for a pan-tilt zoom camera. If you're using a fixed camera on a pole, just mount directly to the pole. You don't need the standoff because you're not looking behind it. You're looking one direction and it's always out. It's not turned around facing the pole. So if it's a fixed camera, you don't need that. But a gooseneck for a pan-tilt zoom camera on a pole is really a good idea because it gives you more view. It gives you that standoff. You can set it so that you can reduce your cost of ownership. So this is a parapet mount, and they go on roofs, generally speaking, flat roofs. And they are much like a gooseneck, if you look at it, because of that standoff. I can see, if I just went on the corner of the building, right where this pipe starts to come up off the corner of the building, down here in the left corner, if I just put the camera there, I couldn't look down. I could look out, and I could see the city, and I could probably, look out enough when I angle the camera down, maybe a pan-tilt zoom, to see out into maybe a parking area down here. But when I come out on this parapet mount, I can see straight down, and I can see back at my building, and I can see in all directions. Again, the mount increases your field of view exponentially because the building itself, the thing it's mounted to, isn't in the way. Just like with the gooseneck, the pole would have been in our way, and it still is a little bit. The parapet mount almost takes the building out of contention because you're able to see the face of the building here. And if you've got this mounted out on a 45-degree angle and you've got a pan-tilt zoom, you could see all the way down one side of the building and another and out enough where nothing obstructs your view at all, really. Now, the beauty of the parapet mount. So that's the beauty of the parapet mount from an obstruction standpoint, right? The traffic obstruction and the building obstruction, the thing that's going to be in the way. But you buy these with a swing away, and almost all of them are sold that way. if we had to work on this camera on top of the building, and this one is about 4 feet, maybe a little more out on the parapet, we would still have to get a lift truck to get up to it. Or you'll see where we can put a cable to get it down, but we'd still have to get to this camera. This thing is on a swivel. It's locked in place. You unlock it, you swivel it around, and your repair technician stands on the roof safely, back 5 feet from the edge, fixes the camera, checks it to make sure it works, right? Tests it out, swings it back in place, locks it in place, tests it again, and it's been repaired. No lift truck, no ladder, no safety issue. Parapet mounts, you will see them on high buildings quite a bit. And the reason that they do that is so you don't block the view with the building itself, and the ease of swinging them around and working on them safely cuts your cost of ownership tremendously. When we get out into the parking areas, we have the same types of issues, right? Cost of ownership, normally height. Let's go with the one in the middle first. This is a wind down. The camera itself is on a gooseneck, but it's up much higher. But inside the pole is a pulley, and a cable runs up through the gooseneck and onto the camera, and either through a power button, right, a power motor, because you have power here for your lights, or just a hand crank. You have a key, you take the a little cover off here, and there's a hand crank inside, and you crank it down, and the camera comes down on a cable. The cable has the coax and power and everything connected to it. You lower it down to the ground. One of these fine people right here works on that camera. Then she comes over here, cranks it back up into place. There's little teeth, if you will, on the top so that it slides right into the right spot so that it's angled the right way. And you're done. Cost of ownership, no lift truck. In this case, you'd have to go up really high. Look at this pole. So you put it on a cable and you wind it down. They can be finicky because you're not using them a lot. And anything that's a mechanical crank type device like that, you need to make sure that it stays protected, lubricated, right? It can get stuck. If it gets stuck, it's one of those sucks to be you moments, and you're getting a lift truck up there to fix the thing, or you've got somebody that has to repair it. So there's an apparatus in here. But generally speaking, from a cost of ownership on very high cameras, these things can't be beat. If you can't have it on the side of a building on a parapet, then you put it on a cable. The hinge pole is another option, and I've seen these used, and generally speaking, you don't want them to be too tall. These are for 20, 25 feet mounts, generally speaking, and they're hinged at about the 12.5 foot mark here. This little pin locks in here. When you unlock it, you grab it, and it's on a lever, and this part where the camera is just comes down. You work on it, you get over here, and you pull it back in place, and you lock it in place, and everybody's happy. These can be extremely expensive. You wouldn't think so, but they run around $1,000 to $1,500 for the pole. Actually, that's probably higher now. I haven't looked at these in a while. I did talk to someone who installs them. They said that they use an estimate of $10,000 per pole because you have to sync the pole. It has to be permanently mounted, and if you're only using it for cameras, that's an expensive mount. However, from cost of ownership, to get up to 25 feet, you're going to need a lift truck. You have to rent or own a lift truck, and they are not cheap, and you have to schedule yourself because everybody else in town is using them too. And so normally your repair person is going to charge you $1,000 a day for the use of a lift truck to get up to work on a camera. They're going to spend 2 or 3 hours working on the thing, getting it all tuned up. They're going to send you a bill for $1,000 for repair and another $1,000 for the lift truck. You've doubled your cost of ownership because of the height of the camera. In this case, that first $1,000 for the lift truck goes away because you can drop it down. You've cut your cost of ownership in half. Finally, we have something called a panoramic, and I have seen these in use in a few places. It again is a lot of it has to do, and this is a panning camera. And again, since you're away from the pole a little bit, you can see farther, right? Only when you spin it all the way around and you're looking directly at the pole. But again, it's not right on the pole, so as we did with our hand, we're a little bit farther out so you get a better view. Haven't seen these used. This actually can be used on an arc. There's a device you use or an apparatus at the bottom of it that disconnects, and this thing folds down, and you can work on them from the ground, and then you fold them back up again. I think they were more of a gimmick. I don't see a lot of them in use, but you may see them someplace. Aesthetically, they're kind of cool. They add a modern flair to the outside of your facility. So if somebody's really concerned about aesthetics, that may be something you want to look at because you can, again, work on them from the ground because this part swings down and it takes care of that view just like a gooseneck does. But mainly, this is the one you're going to see, the one in the middle, that wind down, because they they save a tremendous amount of money because you can use them at great heights and just lower the camera down to work on it and raise it back up again. I want to talk real quickly because we're getting close to the hour mark here. Hopefully you broke this up a little bit. But I want to talk about recorder choices just a little bit. For the purposes of our project, we're going to use net video recorders unless you really feel the logic and a need to use something else. A net video recorder is just that. It is a server of sorts. It is a computer that you record your video on, and you have it on premise normally. We don't put it remote because of that bandwidth issue, but because it sucks up the bandwidth. You could put it remote, but generally speaking, we're going to have it right there on the site with us. The hardware has to be maintained. The life cycle on these things is about 3 to 5 years. That sounds like it's very short, but these are servers. Firmware on them needs to be updated. Operating languages change. All kinds of changes come about. You run out of storage space on them. They can only fit a certain amount, and then you have a need to record for longer periods of time for some regulatory reason or because of some incident. Somebody says we need to have recordings that go back 6 months on this. And the normal NetVR maybe can give you 30 days worth of video if you're running 16 cameras into it before it starts to overwrite or the video starts to degrade. You can set them for that 6 months, but you're going to get that jumpy old bank video look again. But for the most part, using NetVR on-premise, especially for our projects, because of the bandwidth issue. Somebody watching it remotely is going to be very disappointed in the speed of the thing. They're going to see a lot of spinning beach balls while they're trying to watch video in an emergency. You don't get that with a net video recorder. Now, you can use onboard to cloud. The cameras themselves generally have an SD slot, which is, just a little card. I don't know if everybody's familiar with an SD card, but they were used in digital cameras forever. Now most of them have it built in, but you put the SD card and you slide in. It's a little 1 inch by 1 inch card, and we use extreme models of them for cameras, for video cameras, but it plugs right into the camera, and on board you can get 30 days worth of motion sensing video. You don't record everything. Why would you have a camera pointed at a wall and nothing happens there and have 24 hours worth of wall? You have it set so that when the camera picks up motion through the motion sensors on the camera, then it turns on to record right immediately. And it goes to that SD card. Now, if you just do that and somebody steals your camera, they stole your recording too. If you did an SD card in a ceiling mount on a false ceiling, and I went over and popped the ceiling tile, and nobody was watching the camera, and I clipped that wiring, and I stole that camera, and then went and did whatever I wanted in the room, because you're not going to get any of it on video, you'll never be able to re-record it or recreate it because it's on the card. So you push it to the cloud. You buy space from a company that will sell you that. There are a number of companies. Axis, as we studied their cameras, is one. A company called Your6 is very good. Verkada, that we read about last week, does this for you. I mean, just about anybody uses AWS or Microsoft Azure cloud storage, the same one that you're using essentially for Netflix probably, right? Although they may have their own, but any of the video services, they use these big cloud storage services, and they will rent you space on there. And the good thing is that they push everything to the cloud. You pay for that space, and they maintain the stuff for you. You can go back and look at it. If there are patches or security updates for the cameras, they can be pushed that way through the cloud to the camera. But again, we read about Verkada, and those cameras in the cloud all got hacked, 300,000 of them in one day. And some pretty embarrassing video came out in police departments. I mean, they were recording suspect interviews and confessions from crimes. There were cameras in hospitals and prisons that were recording, and those were all vulnerable. So you really have to think about whether you want to go to the cloud. I think as cybersecurity gets better, of course, the threats are rising to meet that. But as cybersecurity gets better and we get more confidence in the cloud, I think that's probably the way the industry will go. But for the purpose of our projects, let's think about having a box, a video net recorder box right there at the site to record our video, to use to archive it, and to look at it when we need to. And finally, when it comes to cameras, cameras are devices that go on a network in a VSS. Therefore, they are known as Internet of Things devices. They are smart devices now, and a smart device needs to have a password. Anything that you use, I have a Nest thermostat in my houses because I can, remotely turn the heat up and down and the air up and down. I can, if I'm going to the place in Pennsylvania, I can turn the air on before I get there so it's not a hot box. And then I can turn it down if nobody's going to be there, adjust it if the temperature goes up or down. Same thing with the heat. But I have a password on it because otherwise somebody could just, set the thing to 100 degrees. And in the wintertime, I'd be using natural gas at a very expensive rate. In the summertime, it would be unbearable and potentially do damage to things in the house, furniture, and things like that because of the heat and humidity. So you have a password on everything. Cameras come with passwords. And I will tell you that if I went to, I'm going to just guess 90%, and I think I'm pretty accurate, of security cameras hanging in the world today, I could go look at the manufacturer and the model by looking at the camera, right? Take a picture of it, look online, find the manufacturer and the model, and then go online and find the password to that camera. Because installers are notorious for not changing the password on cameras. If you have cameras that are IoT devices that are part of a VSS, you should have a password on that camera. It can be the same, and I know that cybersecurity people will just gasp when I say this. If you have 10 cameras on your system, you could use the same password for all 10. From a maintenance standpoint, I mean, you don't want to have to go to the book and look up the password every time you want to do something on a camera, but you need it to be a password that's not known to people from the outside. And you need to change that password when you have users who change. If you give the password to a certain number of security officers so that they can do certain things with cameras, change the lighting on them or whatever when they're working at night, when they leave, you need to change the password and give those who remain the password. Again, the cybersecurity people say, oh my gosh, you never give out your password. I get that, but let's be practical here. When you've got multiple users, the cameras themselves, at least as of today, normally cannot accept multiple user-defined passwords that match to an individual user. It's usually a single password, but they don't get changed, and you're responsible for that. Now, those wireless cameras that sit on the very edge of your site and don't have a password change are pretty vulnerable. They're a pathway to other data because they're sitting on your network. Now, it's not as simple as it sounds that, well, I just get the password for that camera and I can get into that camera and now I can use that to get into the network and I can steal all the company secrets and, I can become the world's greatest hacker. No, it doesn't work that way. There's a lot of things in the way. But for a talented and motivated hacker, you just made things easier, and the whole idea is to make things harder. Most cameras then, since they don't have a password protection and they're really just connected to the network to get back to their NetVR, they don't have a program that shoots the latest security patches to the camera themselves. So with Verkada, they had cameras that were actually hacked. It wasn't the server at Verkada. They were actually hacking into cameras themselves. Then they went in and then were able to open them all up. Once they got, used the camera to get back to Verkada's stuff, then they were able to go back out again, right? But bottom line is that the cameras themselves have security patches and firmware, and that same 90% without a password on it, I'll guarantee that nobody's pushing firmware and security patches to it. You're responsible for this, for device security, and you will get yourself fired if you don't at least keep a record that you have called this to someone's attention. Those cameras are Internet of Things devices. They are vulnerable to attack. The passwords should be changed. They need to be protected. They need to have firmware and security patches sent to them on a regular basis. There are companies, most of the companies that actually do camera install will give you a cyber hygiene contract, and they will take care of pushing that. Many of the camera manufacturers, if you rent cloud space, they will push it for you. If you put it into a contract, you do that. But if nothing else, you need to make sure that everyone is aware, especially your IT department, that you consider this to be a vulnerability and you need their help in closing that loop. So I'm way over on our normal time, but I get geeked out on this stuff. I like it, and I think it's really valuable information for you to take to the workplace. So the takeaways this week: task and purpose are always the driver. What is the camera doing and why is it doing it? Task and purpose. Keep repeating that, because if you have a task and purpose for every camera and essentially any security device you use, then you can justify it and you can justify why it did what it did, even when it fails. Even when it fails to meet its purpose, You had it right. This is what you're looking for. Why didn't you catch the person taking the tie from the, the fine, men's accessories counter next to the jewelry counter with your camera? You put that camera there and we spent all that money on the camera and you couldn't catch that 5 feet away? No, because my task was to watch the jewelry counter. The purpose was to prevent the theft of jewelry, and I stuck true to my task and purpose. There was no reason for me to install a camera by itself to protect the neckties. Therefore, I didn't catch the theft of the expensive necktie. Task and purpose, task and purpose, task and purpose. You pick the camera based on its practical criteria: environment, location practicality, the availability of power and network, the right camera for the right place. We've studied the different types of cameras, and we understand that you don't need a PTZ for everything, even though they are cool and you can play with them and they're really fun to use, and they can be. They are not the best choice if your task and purpose, again, is to watch one particular thing in one particular location. The camera power and transmission source, they absolutely matter. The availability of power, the protection of the power, the hardwiring, we don't plug them in, and the transmission source, right? Is it wireless or is it wired? And there are good reasons for both, but the wired method is the tried and true. It is certainly more reliable. And as much as we use wireless cameras for our homes in an industrial environment, they will be hiccuping on you regularly because you're sharing bandwidth with others. And I would suggest that you will not be happy with the result in today's environment. Choosing the right camera mount, we went over camera mounts, choosing the right one can drastically reduce the cost of ownership. And you'll have to budget for cost of ownership at some point in your life. You put up a 100 camera system and you put them all up in places that are hard to access. You put your parapets out, put them on parapet mounts so you can see everything, but you didn't get swingaways, so that you still have to get a lift truck to safely take care of the camera, and you didn't put them on cables going down. You put them on high poles in the parking lot, or you put them on poles in the parking lot that you can't really access. Your cost of ownership went up and your budget will suffer. Think about the right mount for the right cost of ownership. Recorders are easy. You've got the NetVR box that you have locally, or you generally record to an SD card on the device and then also jump it to the cloud. The first one is tested. It's trustworthy. It's pretty foolproof. It's wires. The second one is getting more and more trusted and testy, and it's slick, and it's definitely cheaper, at least from the initial outlay. But keep that Verkada story in the back of your mind. Understand that if you have cameras that are in sensitive areas and they are compromised, they're far more likely to be compromised if they're going to a cloud, because they're in someone else's control, than if they are on your own network locally. And device security, it's your responsibility. It's not necessarily your responsibility to take every step to protect them, from a mechanical or from a practical standpoint. It is your responsibility to make sure that those who run your networks understand that you have an Internet of Things device at the very end of the network that may be vulnerable, and it sits in the parking lot. If you tell them that, their eyes will light up and they will make sure that you have the latest firmware and security patches on all of your cameras, and you must make sure that your installer sets every one of them with a password, gives you those passwords, and you maintain that password until people that don't need it anymore, and then you change it on a regular basis and when there's changes in personnel. So 1 hour, 13 minutes, and 9 seconds in. You don't have any reading this week, so there's your trade-off, right? I spoke for a little bit longer, but there is no reading for this week. The lecture is done. Thank you very much for your attention. There is a quiz. I know how you all love my quizzes. We're going to do the quiz this week. You don't need to plot your cameras on your drawings for this week. You will turn those in next week. However, there's no reason that you can't start doing it and start thinking about where you're going to put cameras, what kind of mounts you're going to use, what kind of, are they going to be wired or wireless, and where the power is going to come from, all those great things. Start thinking about that. You won't turn that in this week. This week is a quiz. But the week after, you'll be turning those in, and then we're going to get to the point of our drawing where we set the budget, and we start negotiating with each other on a team concept, because you will work in the real world with design teams to do this. You will bring your suggestion in, and others will bring theirs in, and you will need to compromise. So this week is a quiz, And next week, you'll be turning in those drawings of cameras, but there's nothing that says you can't start working on plotting some of those out and thinking about where you'd put them and what types you'd put and how you'd power them and what mounts you'd use. With that, have a great week. I'm available, as most of you know, and many of you call me on a fairly regular basis, and I love that. It's not a problem at all. When my wife and I are sitting here watching TV at night and the phone rings, she always asks, "Is it your son or a student?" Because you're the only people who call me at night. And I love hearing from both. So not a problem with that. If you need anything, just let me know. With that, have a great week. Try to enjoy, hopefully, the beginnings of spring.